Hello everybody, and welcome to another how to use the SSJS library guide. This time we go into the logger function and how we can use the logger function to log individual events on your SSJS code. As usual, I go into my VS Code, which has a file which is linked to a cloud page to speed up my development process. As normal, you would start your SSJS code with something like a platform node core version 1, a try and catch block, and a write stringify e for the e value out of the catch method to actually write out any error. If we go to the cloud page, we will expect no output because this cloud page itself doesn't output anything at this stage. However, if we will throw this is an error, the first thing you will see if we refresh this, it will actually print it out to the cloud page itself. The reason for that is the throw error will actually trigger the catch block and write out the value of e. This in itself is a really good way of just simply debugging your code if certain things go wrong while you're writing your SSJS code. However, this is not really practical if we want to put this into a production environment or want to monitor what is going on with our code long term. So how can we actually change this? Well, the SSJS library has something which is called the logger. In order to initialize the logger, all we need to do is say, for example, var log and initialize the logger with new logger. This logger actually requires a category name, which is part of the logger. So let's say we call it demo. I will showcase you where this comes out. The logger itself works in levels. There are several different levels for this logger based off the log4j guidelines, which are fatal, error, warn, info, debug, or trace. There is a hierarchy where if you set your level from your logger to trace, every message which is flagged as trace or above will be logged into this logger. If you set it for debug, everything which will be above debug or debug itself will be logged, but not trace. So the order is trace, debug, info, warn, error, and fatal. So let's demonstrate this for a moment. We have to set a level for the logger. And let's say we want to only log any event which is debug. So instead of throwing an error right now, we just want to log a message for debug. And let's say this is a debug message. If we save this and run it in our cloud page, what you will see is we actually get a debug message in our console. The logger itself is using the console as a default output. You can see the timestamp, the log level, as well as the category name we gave it, demo, and the actual debug message. One thing is to note, if you do not define a debug level, no output will happen. Because by default, all logging events are off. So you can easily add this to your code and not getting any output. So let's say we log a debug event. So what we can also do is we can concatenate. Or we can concatenate with an array. Or we can even concatenate with an object. So if we put this one out again, what we will have is we can concat with an array and even an object in the console. This makes debugging, especially larger JSON objects or in general objects, way more easy to process and understand what's going on. If we would now add a trace message into the logger, then we will not see this trace message. If we refresh our cloud page, nothing will change. And the reason for that is, as I explained before, trace is the lowest level, and because we set our logger to debug, trace will not be output. However, if we would add trace and change it to trace and refresh, we will get also the trace message. So you can control whatever you want in there. So you can say we only want an output of 1 or above. And let's say we log this as a fatal. We will now get no message because we do not have any log event which is 1 or above. However, if we throw an error as before, this will trigger a fatal log which matches the level we have. So if we do this, we actually get a fatal. You can customize color scheme as well, but I will showcase this in another session. This is quite cool and helpful. However, it only puts out everything into a console. So how can we do it differently? Well, this is where appenders come into play. The logger itself just takes the log message itself. The appender is actually the method where we want to output this log message to. So in normal log4j or log4js, there are several appenders available. Many of those are not available to us in SSJS, purely because of how the system is running. However, there are some appenders we can use and I've created into the library. So let's play around with some appenders. First of all, I want to show you a data extension which is automatically created when you install the library, which is the liblogger data extension. It has a date, a timestamp, an ID, a message, a level, a category, and a subscriber key. Also, I want to showcase you, there's a website for testing purposes, which is postbin, which we can create a post endpoint to test post information. So let's set this up. Instead of setting a blank level for each appender, we can actually set a level for each individual appender. So if I take this example config I already have created, you can see what we do is we say log.configure. We define appenders as an array, and we say we have an appender type data extension, and the level for this is info. The type console gets traced, the type HTML gets debug, and the type HTTP gets error. And the endpoint we're sending this through is the website I showed you, with a post command, a content type, and maybe some additional payload we want to add there. So let's first of all create another bin and copy the URL to test this post method out. So with this, our logger is configured into 4 different appenders with 4 different levels of debugging. So let's go back to our original code here. So we do a log.debug, and let's say we don't want to concatenating that so much. The debug should only be seen in the console, because console is taking everything from trace and above, and in the HTML, which is in the browser window, and it takes everything from debug. However, it should not be seen in the data extension nor should it be seen in the HTTP, because both are a level higher than debug. So let's say this should be seen in console and HTML. The trace itself will only be seen in the console, because debug, info and error are above this level. So this message, or this trace, should only be in console. Now let's do another one. Let's do an info. So we can do an info, and this info should be seen in HTML, console and dataExtension. So let's do this, HTML, and the console. While when we log an error, this should be seen in all. This is an error in all. So if we test this now and we refresh our page, what we get is we see this should be seen in console and HTML. This is an info message and it should be in HTML, DE and console, and the error should be in all. The same you see down here. The debug message should be seen in the console. The trace should be only seen in the console. There is no trace up here, only debug, info and error. The info is in HTML, DE and console, and the error in all. And you have an additional trace message that there was a request being made to this endpoint. So if we refresh our post bin, you will see that we got now a post bin information, and we get a timestamp, an ID, the level, the message, the category, and our additional payload. If we're looking out in our data extension, we will see two messages, one for an info and one for an error. The info is there because it should be in the DE, and the error should be in all. With this method, you can easily control which appender gets which information depending on your code. So whenever you want to debug something, trace, write an info, log an error, do something with fatal, you can define which appender should receive this information. There are several appenders with data extension, console, HTML and HTTP, one of those. Currently, I'm testing and working on triggered send definitions, which is already an appender inside the logger function, but there are limitations because at this stage we cannot group any messages together, and it's not wise to send a TDS for each individual error or message. So at this stage it's limited to a certain level, so we don't spam the information out over multiple emails. You have additional information. So for example, if you look in the data extension, a subscriber key can be added. So what we could do is we could also add subscriber key. If this script will run for a specific subscriber key, we can add something like this towards it. And if we refresh our page, if we now refresh our data extension, you will see that the subscriber key has been added there as well. By default, it will be not applicable, because if you do not have a subscriber key, then there's probably a reason why you don't have a subscriber key, because maybe the script is not being used on a subscriber level, but more on a generic level. Thank you for watching, and I hope you can use this in your future project when you have the SSJS library installed.